Good morning, everyone, or good evening, according to where are you joining us from. Thank you very, very much for coming onto this webinar in such great numbers from so many parts of the world. I am Paola Barbarino, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Alzheimer's Disease International. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the very first human rights webinar that we have ever done. And I have with me a fantastic co-chair and a wonderful roster of panelists. So before we get into that, I'll just be telling you a few things about how we're running this webinar today. The format will be individual presentations followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. Please type any question in the dialogue box for the Q&A session, and any unanswered question will be picked up later. You can also send us questions by emails at a.bliss, B-L-I-S-S, @alz.co.uk. If you cannot use the chat box, we'll try and pick those questions and answer them later. We are recording this webinar, which is live, and we will post the webinar on our website very shortly afterwards. So if you missed any part, you will be able to catch it there. Now, let me introduce you to my fellow panelists. First and foremost, my co-chair. My co-chair today is Kate Swaffer, who is the chair, CEO, and co-founder of Dementia Alliance International, and who is an elected board member of Alzheimer's Disease International. Other panelists include Professor Suzanne Hill, who is Adjunct Professor of Social Work and Social Policy at Trinity College Dublin, and is the author of Dementia and Human Rights. Silvia Perel-Levin, who is the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in Geneva, and the representative of the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, IMPEA, to the UN. We also have with us Beth Wighton, who is the founding member and co-chair of Dementia Advocacy Canada, and the founding member and chair of the Ontario Dementia Advisory Group. We have with us also Jim Pearson, who is the Director of Policy and Research at Alzheimer Scotland. And last but not least, LiYu Tang, the Secretary General of the Taiwan Alzheimer's Disease Association. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists to be with us today. It really is a very high-powered panel to speak about the subject. But what do we want to achieve from this webinar? There are practical approaches to dementia and rights. And it's very important for us to discuss how the government's report on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, how you can embrace human rights and the CPRD in your work, and how you can get involved. This is a route that not many use to actually get solution to dementia and to get government to pay attention. Canada, and Mary Beth will tell us more about that, has been very successful at following this route. We need every route that we can get in order to get government to focus their attention on dementia. And this seems to be a very productive way. It may not work in all cases, but we do need to start working on it now if we want it to work in the future. Why are rights important in the national plans? Well, the focus on human rights is actually embedded in the Global Dementia Action Plan of the World Health Organization. So it's something that we should all embrace anyway. The fact that it's not embraced is simply showing you that there is something useful that we could be doing more, and we are not doing. And this is exactly why we're having this webinar. We hope that we will inspire you. And we hope that we will hear some great examples about human rights, disability support, and what are the enablers that we can use, together with some great examples, as I said. Well, I'd like to thank, before passing my words to Kate Swaffer, I would like to thank Chris Lynch, the Deputy CEO of ADI, and Annie Bliss, who is our communication manager, without whom this webinar would have not happened. I also would like to thank someone who may be on the line, Helen Rochford-Brennan, who is not joining the panel, but Helen last month applied exactly these very principles during the Irish election with great effect. So it's important for us to acknowledge that there's a lot of people out there, not just the ones on the panel, they are working very, very hard to make sure that the CPRD and human rights are included in their government discourse. And now, please let me pass to Kate Swaffer, the Chair and CEO of Dementia Alliance International. Kate.
Thank you so much, Paola. Thank you for the introduction to this important webinar. Welcome to the other speakers. And finally, special thanks to everyone for being in attendance. It's a pleasure to be here today and for DAI to be co-hosting an event on human rights again with ADI. The time is now for all of us to move from the continuing rhetoric into real change into policy and clinical practice. And I'm sure all of the speakers will highlight why rights are so important to us all. Next slide, please, Annie. So I thought I'd start with an insider's view. And although I've been a nurse, including working in a secure dementia unit and a care partner, I do have an insider's view because I was diagnosed with dementia over 11 years ago. My accidental activism started after being asked to speak to a group of aged care staff in 2009. And then after attending numerous events about dementia, being told by people with dementia what I was feeling and what was best for me. I think this was the beginning of me feeling there were many breaches of my rights. It's also partly why I co-founded Dementia Alliance International, which is the first international advocacy organisation led exclusively by and for people with dementia, now with members in 49 countries. We're a registered charity, and our vision is a world where all people are valued and included. The misguided underestimations of the potential of people with dementia continue to create oppressive and humiliating barriers to our full and equal engagement in society, and the continuing major breaches of our human rights through the systemic overuse of chemical and physical restraints and through segregation and institutionalisation. Since my own diagnosis, I've been speaking up for the human rights and disability rights of all people with dementia and people living in aged care. In fact, I've been saying since as far back as 2009, the only other group of people to be institutionalised, locked up and segregated from others are convicted criminals. So I'm still wondering why it happens to people with dementia. Next slide, please, Annie. This is a quote from the WHO, but really it's pretty simple. All people, including people with any type of dementia, have human and legal rights. In my time since becoming an accidental activist, I really feel that very little has actually changed. So it really is time that we all work together to make sure it does change. Thanks, Annie. So just reflecting on these demands when I was preparing for this talk, which for me is tonight, these were the three demands that I made on behalf of Dementia Alliance International and our membership back in 2015. And that's a more ethical pathway of care, including rehabilitation, being treated with the same human rights as all others, and that research does not only focus on a cure.
Can I interrupt you just a second, Kate?
Sure.
There is a technical issue on the line, and some of Kate's slides are not coming out. We will share all of the slide deck at the end of this presentation. So Kate, bear in mind, some of the viewers will not be able to see your slides. Very sorry about that. Okay.
Thanks, Paola. And I just cut off a Skype call that was trying to come in, so I apologise for that. And yet all of these years later, we are still being told to go home and prepare to die. We're told there's nothing that you can do to help us, and there's nothing we can do to help ourselves. It's very much still a last century view of dementia, and I was prescribed disengagement, told to go home and prepare for the end. And DAI members are still reporting that that's happening to them today, 11 years later. Next slide, please, Annie. So it's time that we reframe dementia as a condition causing acquired cognitive and many other disabilities. We need, I think, to stop the expensive Band-Aid approach and work together on ensuring the rights of everyone stop being breached. And this includes people with dementia. My university is an example of how we could change. They set me up with a whole range of disability supports to make sure I could keep living my life, and we need the healthcare sector to do that for us as well. But reframing dementia as a disability will move our approach away from the medical model of care to one that's based on more social and disability pathway of support and care, very similar to one that I self-prescribed for myself 10 years ago. We need to think about not completely rejecting the medical model of care, but supporting people to live with their acquired disabilities. Dementia was included in the UN report on the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which identified human rights concerns faced by both people with disabilities who are ageing and older persons who acquired disability, and that obviously includes people with dementia. Hence, both the UN and the WHO consider dementia as a disability. But we do have a long way to go, as even last year at the Convention of State Parties conference, which I attended, I had to join a protest rally to allow full wheelchair access for people attending the COSP. That's in 2019. We're still protesting for wheelchair access to the UN. So I think for communities to provide support for people with largely invisible disabilities, we've probably got a very long way to go. But it was a pretty sobering experience to be at the UN and have to have a protest rally for wheelchairs. Thanks, Annie. Sorry, so none of the slides are going through. So the 1948 UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights is meant to protect every citizen in the world, including people with dementia. Other conventions are concerned with fundamental human rights, and they include the Convention on the Cultural and Social and Economic Rights, which is particularly relevant to people with dementia. And there are other conventions. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was adopted in 2006, but it's really only now beginning to be used by the dementia community. People with dementia are included specifically in the definition of the CRPD in Article 1. Persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So in spite of all the publications, all of the conferences, all of the events and meetings about our rights, in a practical sense, little seems to have changed yet. And the OECD report in 2015, the Addressing Dementia report, the OECD response, they concluded that people with dementia receive the worst care of any disease in the developed world. And indeed, many members of DAI report that they get little or no care around the world. I personally have experienced many human rights violations, and many other people with dementia report. Similarly, we are denied full health care and support, and that relates to Article 25 to health, Article 26 to habilitation and rehabilitation. We often are denied social participation. Many CRPD articles relating to that. CRPD Article 5, denial of employment and reasonable accommodations for younger people who live with dementia. My point in case, when I lost my driver's license, I lost my job instead of being supported to stay at work. Again, a denial of rehabilitation and many other violations of our human rights, and particularly in denial of equality and non-discrimination. So since the time of my diagnosis and across various aspects of my life, I've been treated detrimentally because of my acquired disabilities, and without self-managing, self-prescribing, and more importantly, self-funding, because generally the health system in Australia doesn't fund much of the healthcare that I've self-prescribed, I would not have achieved universal health coverage or a high quality of life. So these and many other breaches of my rights are part of the fuel for my continued activism as governments and healthcare providers can continue to deny us what I see as often the most basic of services and support. So in harnessing the CRPD, we need to lobby to ensure that regional, national and local dementia policies and future plans reflect CRPD principles and articles. We need to insist on the rights of people with dementia to participate as equals in the development of policy and the implementation of the CRPD. We need, using these rights, to submit parallel reports when a country is reporting to the CRPD committee, and to publicise committee's concluding observations to advocate for the implementation of its recommendations. Another point worth talking about, the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, or more easily known as OPCAT, is also of particular relevance to people living in aged care with and without dementia. The current monitoring of residential aged care facilities is what I can only say is substandard and inadequate globally. And for example, in Australia, we have a Royal Commission into aged care, and that's revealed even more abuse than what the media seem to be able to keep up with reporting. The current monitoring of residential aged care facilities in Australia and possibly all over the world is inadequate, and multiple federal and state inquiries in my country and my state have highlighted many cases of torture and abuse. The Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety has also uncovered systemic abuses across many jurisdictions in Australia. Yet it appears that my government is not going to deem dementia units, for example, as potential places of detention. In New Zealand, they've begun monitoring OPCAT, and they now deem that locked residential aged care facilities, both privately run and publicly run, are part of the New Zealand's OPCAT obligations. And that means that they will be treating those facilities as places of detention under the same scrutiny as, for example, a jail. So at the global level, in terms of monitoring of abuse in aged care facilities, New Zealand has used Australia in a way as our Royal Commission almost as a way to educate, to have change rather than to wait for a Royal Commission to be needed in New Zealand. So Article 19, which is about inclusion, Article 19 of the CRPD, does mean that there must be nothing about us without us. And I've been speaking out particularly for inclusion for 10 or 11 years, and pioneer advocates like Christine Bryden from Australia and James McKillop from Scotland, the late Peter Ashley from the UK, they were speaking out for inclusion 20 years ago on the same motto of nothing about us without us. But the reality is that almost every week I hear or attend events and conferences which continue to be about us without us. And therefore we ask that if you're invited even to speak at a conference or event and you don't have dementia, it's actually up to you to also challenge the organisers. It's one small thing you can do to support equal inclusion, to support all people with dementia. A few questions just in closing. You can't see my slides, so I'll read them out. Just some questions to consider. To what extent are your own organisations' policies based on human rights? How closely do you work with other disability organisations in your country or region? Do you know how they have used the CRPD?
Kate, actually, your slides are now visible. So we.
Oh, okay. So I'm on the very last slide. Sorry, I was, because I didn't have any slides on the screen for a while, I was using my own slides off screen. So questions to ask, do you accept dementia as the major cause of disability and dependence in older persons? And more importantly, do your policies or programs reflect dementia as a condition causing disability? And therefore, are your programs focused on disability support, or are they still prescribing disengagement, giving up, going home, telling us there's nothing that can be done. So I apologise for the light in my room and also that you couldn't see all of my slides, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Kate. And the technical issue with the slides was entirely on ADI end, so apologies from ADI about that, but all slides will be available after this webinar. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Professor Suzanne Hill, who is the Adjunct Professor of Social Work and Social Policy at Trinity College Dublin. So, Suzanne, if you would like to start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, Kate, for a wonderful, inspirational talk. It's really set the pitch for this morning's webinar. Well, I was asked to address the topic of dementia as a disability and the current policy response to dementia. And I guess in 7 minutes, that's quite a tall order, but I'll do my best, and hopefully somebody will remind me of the time as well. As most of you listening here this morning know, there are different models that have been used over the years to try and help us improve our understanding of dementia. And they include, like, the biomedical model that Kate has referred to, the social and the disability model, citizenship model, and the human rights model. And here I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about the disability model. But before going on to that, the biomedical model, as we all know, characterizes dementia as an irreversible progressive brain disorder, usually caused by chronic disease. And it results in the gradual decline of mental and physical functioning and ultimately, as Kate mentioned, the lead up to death. The person must be assessed, diagnosed, treated, and cured. And then in the absence of a cure, the primary focus is very much on deficits, shrunken brains, neurocognitive testing, and so on. The model fails to consider the person as an active partner in the treatment process. Indeed, the person is often said to be squeezed out and is seen as not only having the disease, but being the disease. Now, obviously, there are great gains to be got from the biomedical model too, and clearly, we're so committed to finding a cure for dementia, but in many ways it can be quite nihilistic and really not listening to the person, seeing the person as an emotional, thinking person. A less popular but equally powerful model for understanding dementia draws on the social model of disability. And that model clearly distinguishes between terms such as impairment and disability. Impairment refers to the condition of the mind or the body, or in the case of dementia, to memory and cognitive deficit. And then disability refers to how society responds to those needs arising from the impairment. And proponents of this model claim that solutions to dementia are found not just in tackling or curing the impairment, but rather in eliminating the artificial barriers that society creates against people with the impairment. So the social model does not diminish the value of the biomedical model, but it recognizes that dementia is also a disability, solutions to which can be found in dismantling those barriers I've talked about. And then over the years, the social model of disability has been used very powerfully by disability activists and scholars to challenge the biomedical model of disability and to lobby for social change, for non-discriminatory policies, for new legislation, to help people be integrated into society and to give them a fairer deal, essentially. Other important achievements include the elimination of demeaning language, and of course, as Kate referred to earlier, and it was referred to in the opening session by Paola, the development of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. I would argue that regrettably, the dementia community has not been nearly as successful in challenging the biomedical model of dementia, perhaps because there's been some ambivalence and reluctance on the part of people and advocates to self-identify. Dementia advocates and activists have also been very slow to forge alliances with disability activists, despite the fact that much can be gained from such a coalition. So what are these gains? First, the disability model, gives agency and control back to the individual whose voice is elevated. Secondly, the model forces us to think about how society can further disable the person with dementia through prejudicial attitudes, poorly adapted environments, and through policies that often make life harder for the person, not easier. And thirdly, and very importantly, the model confers rights on people as embedded in the UN Convention. And I'm not going to go on about these because we'll probably hear a lot more about them later on, and Kate has already very eloquently referred to them. Excuse me. I just want to go on now and briefly talk about the policy response to dementia. With the exception, in my view, of some few countries, as for example, Scotland, Canada, the US, Australia, Luxembourg, and Belgium, the public policy response to dementia around the world has until recently been largely driven by a deficit model of aging, rather than by an empowerment model of dementia, health, and social well-being. In other words, many policymakers still hold a nihilistic view of dementia, conceptualizing it in terms of dependency, costs, custodial care, drugs, passivity, warehousing, and so on, and not in terms of independence, growth, participation, choice, autonomy, and quality of life. And this is probably because up until relatively recently, the individual's voice has been silenced. The dominant stakeholders have been the medical profession, supported by pharmaceutical companies, campaigning in a largely uncontested field, where the most valuable prize to be won, if not a cure, is at least government or insurance company subsidies that support financial well-being. So the status quo has not been challenged. And there's been a lack of commitment on the part of many governments to consider dementia as a disability and to promote policies that enable people with dementia to exercise their social rights, their rights to autonomy, participation, and independent living. So, for example, in a country like Ireland, where we've over 50,000 people living with dementia, most people have a right to long-term residential care based on income and on need, but they have no rights to home-based community care, as there is no legislation in place to ensure a statutory right to such services. And this was very eloquently brought out in a recent symposium we had in Ireland on human rights by our dear colleague and ambassador, Dr. Helen Rochford-Brennan. So in a sense, our government policy contravenes Article 19 of the UN Convention that states that people with a disability will have the opportunity to choose their place of residence and where and with whom they live on an equal basis with others, and will be supported to do that. And I have other examples, but I'm just conscious of time. Likewise, in Ireland, people in private nursing homes are often prescribed medication, which is free of charge because they're on medical cards, but they don't have a right to actually be prescribed social interventions, therapies. These are all extra charges in private nursing homes in Ireland, and I have a big thing about that. I think it's a breach of human rights. It should be remembered too that where countries have ratified the UN Convention, their governments have entered into international agreements to convert its principles into policy and practice. And governments are required to ensure that all policies comply with the convention. And countries must report to the UN Convention on a regular basis.
Suzanne, you are at your 7 minutes, actually.
I've used up my 7 minutes.
Yeah, if you can wrap up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Oh, can you wrap up then?
I'll just briefly kind of talk about the way forward. For the dementia community, there are lessons to be learned from the success of disability activists. We need to really be thinking about a policy framework that replaces the individual with the collective, the biological with the social, We need a new rights-based approach that replaces marginalization with equality. The magnitude of dementia is such that we need the tools of a wide range of different frameworks. We need the medical model. We also need the social model. It's not an either or. Great achievements can be done in merging the two and in working collectively. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Suzanne, this has been a very comprehensive description and very insightful, very great comments also on the chat line. Can I now pass the word to Silvia Perel-Levin, please, the NGO Committee on Aging based in Geneva. Thank you very much, Silvia.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you, Kate and Suzanne. I will try not to repeat things that you have said, but I think that I come from a different perspective because I do work on the human rights and health of older persons, and I don't think that we can separate the issues. I think that our concerns about the way that older persons, whether you have dementia or not, are the same. The fact of medicalizing aging, I think, is a wrong approach. Talking only about the diseases that people live with is also limiting what a person is. And we think that one should grow old with the same rights as everybody else, which is not the case at the moment. Older persons are discriminated, and what we talk about that one of the root causes of the discrimination is the ageism that is so prevalent in society among all of us, including about also older persons themselves who marginalize themselves or see ourselves as being out of the working environments and learning environments, partly because that's the way has always been, partly because it is ageism or age discrimination is the only category that is really even legal. So you reach an age of, you reach the age of an arbitrary age that somebody decided and you have to retire. You are not accepted to do studies simply because you are too old. You are taking your driving license not only because of dementia, because you are old. You cannot rent a car because you are old, simply because you have 70 years old in most countries. So there are issues that are that intersect that the ageism with the stigma that persons with dementia suffer. They are compounded and they are increased when the two come together. But really, as we all age, is something that everybody, this is something that whether you have dementia, whether you don't have dementia, whether you are straight, whether you are gay, whether you live anywhere, everybody is living longer than before. The population is aging. So we know that while dementia is not necessarily part of aging, but there is more dementia among older persons. And the majority of, sorry, I will rephrase that, the prevalence of dementia increasingly grows with age. And that's when the intersections come together. And I claim that a lot of discrimination that people with dementia suffer are not just because they have dementia, it's because simply they are old. And that's why I think that we need to join forces and not compete with each other and not say, I am not old, I have dementia, or the other way around, I don't have dementia. It doesn't matter. We are discriminated on any reason whatsoever, and we need to work together, because when you take one right, the rights are indivisible and interrelated. So you take one right, you are taking all of the rights. You are discriminating against one group, it's like you are discriminating against everybody. And that's why I challenge when somebody says we belong only to the group of disabilities and not to older persons. I think people with dementia belong to both, or belong to the group that they see themselves part of. And I think the Article 1 of the CRPD, in fact, says that anybody who sees him or herself with dementia has dementia and can participate in the committee. And the same I would say with old. I don't mind being old. In fact, that's who I am. What I do mind is that because I am old, I do get discriminated. I don't get accepted to jobs anymore simply because of my age, or the attitudes that I receive by even healthcare providers, or the issues that both Kate and Suzanne mentioned about the treatment of abuses in home cares. They are common to all home care residencies and not just for people with dementia. And that's why we are active in promoting the rights, and also a convention on the rights of older persons. And I think I invite the movement of dementia to join us in this advocacy effort. There is a UN open-ended working group on aging for the promotion and protection of the rights of older persons that take place in New York once a year. ADI participates, but I think that there is more space for also national or regional organizations to take part. Anybody can be accredited, any association or NGO can be accredited to the open-ended working group. And that is important because even if you cannot attend in person in New York to the meetings, you can also submit written inputs and raise the voice of the people living with dementia at the open-ended working group. You can also advocate that your country, at the national level, that they include dementia in their interventions at the open-ended working group. So it's not just for those who attend those meetings. And at the open-ended working group, we do include issues that are again common for people with dementia or all older persons, like issues of long-term care, issues of palliative care that hasn't been discussed too much in depth at the CRPD for older people. There is recognition, in fact, by the Special Rapporteur on persons with disabilities that the focus on the rights of older persons has also increased the interest in the access to technical or technologies or assistive devices for older persons, and including persons with dementia that otherwise were considered only for younger people. But we consider that also younger persons with disabilities are better treated than older persons with disabilities, including persons with dementia. But we also have an independent expert on the rights of older persons, and that is a mandate that was created 6 years ago. This is another mandate that visits countries and has an annual report. And I think that associations of persons living with dementia need to also make sure that when the independent expert visits the countries, they connect as well with these groups, as well as when other special rapporteurs visit the countries, to make sure that associations of people living with dementia are considered as civil society that are reached and are targeted by the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, or the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, or, just to give a couple of examples. So the issue of dementia or the issue of older persons has to be present in all of the treaty bodies and all of the special procedures. But I wanted to
just to let you know that you've reached your 7 minutes. So if you want to wrap up.
So I will simply add, join, and there are a few links that they are in the next slide, and I will send more links so that you can connect, that you can also join the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People and help us advocate for the rights of older people that includes people with dementia. And also that we have another opportunity with the WHO a Decade of Healthy Aging that will be launched on the 1st of October. And it also, because of the request of member states, is based on a human rights-based approach. And I think that this provides a unique opportunity for all of us to make stronger the links between the health sector and the human rights. And I will be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Silvia, thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation. There's been a lot of interest online in the chat about how do people get involved, how do they join all these mechanisms, and please make no mistakes. What Silvia has described is of enormous importance. The actual environment for us even to participate in these forums, this is what ADI does for everybody, it's extremely important. But there are mechanisms and ways in which all of your voices can be included. And we will be talking about that when we will be answering your questions also after the webinar. I'm not sure we'll have time to pick it up now. But bear in mind that one of the reasons to do this webinar is exactly so that you start developing awareness of all the wonderful ways in which every single group within their national or regional reality can start advocating for the human rights of people with dementia. So this is exactly what we want to achieve. Thank you. And now I am going to pass the baton to Beth Wighton, who is a founding member and co-chair of Dementia Advocacy Canada. And let's not forget that Canada is one of the nations that has been the most successful globally to use human rights as a weapon to really embed the discourse around the rights of people with dementia. Mary Beth, please.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Canada signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Treaty on March 30th, 2007. It was ratified on March 11th, 2010. Today, I will talk about two important Canadian advocacy groups, the Ontario Dementia Advisory Group and the Dementia Advocacy Canada Group. The slide that you see in front of you is a listing of all the different accomplishments and articles that ODAG has challenged and has been very successful at moving forward. On April 11th of 2016, on behalf of Ontario Dementia Advisory Group, of which I was chair, I contacted the clerk for the Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology. There was a study being done on dementia on Canadian society. Part of my letter stated, developing a cure must be the long-term goal of dementia policy making, but supporting and empowering people with dementia and their families should equally be an important policy goal. It is critical that government uses the best available evidence to design appropriate policies that affect people living with dementia. The Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology has been authorized to examine and report on the issue of dementia in our society. Its website shows 14 witnesses that have or scheduled to provide testimony. The glaring gap in the witness list is a person living with dementia representing the key stakeholder group. The time is now to include people with dementia in contributing directly to the examination of and the reporting on the issue of dementia in our society. And who better to learn from than people with dementia who live the experience of dementia every day, who utilize programs and services, and who are citizens within Canadian society. ODAG received the following comment back. This email is being sent to advise you that the committee would like to invite you to participate in its public hearing on this study. This was truly a victory for people with dementia in Canada, for we had been acknowledged and we are being invited to the table. Next slide, please. The next group that I'd like to talk to you about is the Dementia Advocacy of Canada. This group is a combination of people living with dementia and care partners, whereas ODAG is a group of people just living with dementia. Dementia Advocacy Canada is made up from people across the country who want to have an active and respected role in decisions about policies and programs that impact our lives. Together, we recognize our value as a distinct and separate group who, by working together, we can amplify the voices of people with lived experience in Canada. DAC was founded in 2019, and this was as a continuation of conversations that began in May 2018 at the National Dementia Conference to provide a conduit for the voices of those with lived experiences to be heard. We are busy focusing on 3 advocacy priorities: system navigation from diagnosis to end of life, national requirements for regulation of personal support workers and healthcare aides to ensure that the minimum standards for education and training are being met, and rehabilitation to help people living with dementia to live as well as possible. These priorities, in turn, support the articles that you see in front of you on this PowerPoint slide. In a short period of time since our inception, we have made incredible achievements. In particular, the message that it takes everyone across all sectors to work together to support the National Dementia Strategy implementation. But we certainly have our frustrations. Perhaps the most dominant one is just simply the challenge of recruiting members. Next slide, please. The new National Dementia Strategy Plan has human rights as one of its principles. It is a principle because certain ministerial members fought hard for its inclusion. It is now up to the government to uphold these rights through ensuring implementation of goals in support of the CRPD articles. People living with dementia stated that we want our human rights to be respected, including support for our dignity and autonomy to make our own decisions, to be free from discrimination and stigma, and the full inclusion in society. Changes in decision-making models, scaling up of assistive technologies, and standardized policies in long-term care regarding consent, privacy, and sexual autonomy are suggested as potentially helpful in ensuring that the human rights of those living with dementia are respected. Next slide, please. So what's next for Canada? Canada has a lot of work ahead in its effort to fight dementia. Creating a national dementia strategy is one thing, but now it must be implemented, and quickly. What is disturbing is Prime Minister Trudeau's mandate letter to the Minister of Health in 2019, which does not include any reference to dementia. The government as Canada has not prioritized dementia as a national crisis. Advocacy groups of Canada must work together, breaking down the silos to present a unified front to the government to fight for dementia to be put on a priority list.
I'm just going to tell you that you've reached your 7 minutes, so if you could wrap up. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Urgency must be felt to implement the National Dementia Strategy. Thank you.
That was it. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. You have actually got quite a number of very interesting questions coming to you that you will have not seen, some of which regarding the rights of Indigenous people, which of course are a really big issue in Canada. I hope we can pick those up in the Q&A. But without further ado, I'd like to pass the baton to Jim Pearson, the Director of Policy and Research at Alzheimer Scotland. And Jim, 7 minutes to you. We're trying to keep some time at the end for Q&A, so please, over to you.
Thank you, Paola. So could we have a next slide, please? And yeah, that one. So any of you who were probably very quickly would have noticed there that that first slide had Henry Simmons' name on it. I'm clearly not Henry Simmons. So this slide here, just very briefly, describes an approach and a vision that Alzheimer Scotland have been working to for at least the last decade, about how we transform the system in Scotland to ensure that people who are living with dementia, their families or carers, are supported in a way that respects them as individuals and fulfills their human rights from the point that they become concerned that they or someone else in their family may have an illness which causes dementia, right through to end-of-life care. And in every setting, whether people are living at home or in a care home or in a hospital or specialist health service. And of course, wrapped around all of that is the work that not only Alzheimer Scotland, but many other organisations in Scotland have been involved in around developing better dementia awareness, dementia-friendly community initiatives. Now, this vision has been one which has been shaped and informed by our engagement networks, our active voice networks, the Scottish Dementia Working Group, the National Dementia Carers Action Network, and all of our local active voice networks, which we have been establishing across all of our localities. So this is part of a collective movement which is about engaging people with dementia, empowering them and enable them to not just influence policy at a national level, but to influence that policy and implementation of it within their localities. Next slide, please. So this image here is the image of a launch of what is Scotland's Charter of Rights for people with dementia and their families and carers. That was published in 2009. It was an initiative driven by the cross-party parliamentary group within Scotland, and we worked with other stakeholders, including the members of the cross-party group, but including the Scottish Human Rights Commission, to frame a charter which set out why human rights were absolutely relevant to and important to people with dementia, and create a framework which wasn't seeking to create new law, but simply to restate that the existing human and other legal rights that people with dementia should enjoy, as well as any other group within society, and full citizenship. And that charter is a really important document, and there you see it being signed by Scottish members of the Scottish Parliament when we launched it in the Parliament in October of 2009, with widespread cross-party support across and endorsed by the Scottish Parliament. And that preceded, can I have the next slide, please? That preceded Scotland's first national dementia strategy in 2010. Now, this slide here just describes clearly what some of those barriers were that get in the way of people living with dementia and their families and carers actually being able to fulfil their rights and experience those rights in their everyday lives. And the Charter, we wanted to make sure that it achieved some key aims. So we didn't want a charter that became a poster that hung on the walls of hospitals or care homes or any other setting. We wanted that to be a living document which actually could help empower people with dementia and their carers to know and understand and be able to assert their rights in every part of their daily lives and wherever they happen to be. We also wanted to make sure that it influenced change in practice, and that those people who provide health and social care and other services fully understood, and were able to empower to be able to respect and understand the rights of people and the services and the support that they provided. And we also wanted to make sure that the Charter was a driver for both change in policy and in practice. Can I have the next slide, please? So this just shows the front page of that charter, but what was really important about that was the approach. And we took the advice of the Scottish Human Rights Commission, who promote this panel approach, and you see that down the left-hand side there, which sets out underpinning principles of a human rights-based approach, which I understand from the Scottish Human Rights Commission is a United Nations endorsed approach, but panel, which is the right of every person to participate in the decisions that affect their lives. That's the small decisions every day that affect their life, but also policy decisions which affect their day-to-day lives. So being able to involve in decisions at all levels, the accountability of those who have responsibility to ensuring that those rights are fully respected and delivered, that those rights should be delivered in a way which is non-discriminatory, that there should be a process to ensure that people are empowered to be able to know and fully understand what their rights are and what that means to them in every day. What does it look like and feel like if your rights are fully respected, so that they can understand and claim them. And legality in any decisions that are taken. So where there are circumstances where you have provisions perhaps where someone who may need supported decision making, or where we have legal frameworks like mental health legislation, which might permit for someone to be detained, that these were done with full respect for human rights, and that there was always a proportionate balance between protection and fulfilment of rights. So the Charter was designed to ensure that we protected and fulfilled all existing human rights for people with dementia and their carers, and reflects those which are guaranteed in the conventions which are listed and covenants which are listed there. Can I have the next slide, please? So Scotland has since then had 3 national dementia strategies. The Charter has been a key driver of shaping the policy and the commitments to change practice which are within those national dementia strategies. So every policy or every policy commitment and practice commitment developed in that is founded on that human rights-based approach. The Charter and the national dementia strategies have been shaped by the voice of those people living with dementia. And as a consequence of the strategy, 2 of the key things that came out from the very first strategy was the development of new standards of care for people with dementia, which are written as statements of rights that set out what people can expect in any setting and at every part of the illness. And a new, well, it's not so new now, but a knowledge and skills framework called Promoting Excellence, which sets out the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviours of expected of everyone who would work with people with dementia and their carers. Now, our national dementia strategies set out a really positive framework and underpinned by those human rights principles. However, there is a...
Just a second to tell you that you are at your 7 minutes. So if you
okay, so I'm just about to finish it. So we are but there are big gaps between the intention of that policy and the delivery of it at local level. Can I just go to that next slide just to finish then? Yeah. So we are about to consult on Scotland's 4th National Dementia Strategy, and I'll just finish by saying that sits within a wider context of other consultations that are currently taking place. But our focus, and that of other partners in Scotland, is to ensure that strategy is informed by the voice of people and those who care for them, who will set the priorities for the 4th Dementia Strategy and be involved at local level in that development, implementation and monitoring.
Jim, thank you very much. This has been fabulous and well within our normal sort of framework of trying to present case studies from nations. So Scotland has done a great job there. And the last speaker, LiYu Tang, the Secretary General of Taiwan Alzheimer Disease Association, will tell us about an example from Asia, in the true spirit of ADI. Incidentally, I have seen now who is on the line. We have people from 5 continents, so it is truly a very global audience today. LiYu, please, to you, you have 7 minutes. I would really like to leave a few minutes for at least one question and the closing remarks. So, please.
Okay, thank you. Annie, please follow me because I have many slides. I will go very quickly. Okay, I will try to share our experience in a very practical level. Okay, next. We have set up a dementia advisory group for almost 1 year, and we have a monthly meeting and line group to share and discuss. Many issues was discussed, like a dementia-friendly bank, library, bus, and metro system, and the financial security, palliative care. And last week, we talked about the impact of COVID-19 to people with dementia. Next, please. People with dementia were invited to join the meeting of National Dementia Plan and also the local action plans. So the voice of people with dementia were heard and added into the national plan and local plan. Next, please. Next slide. Yes. We raise awareness of dementia, human rights of dementia in conference or Alzheimer's campaign and exhibitions. Minister of Health and Welfare, actors, legislators, and many VIPs were invited to join these events. Next, please. People with dementia were invited to join the press conference of Dementia France, which was hosted in Ministry of Health and Welfare. People with dementia played an important role to host this press conference and share their experience. And you can see Peter and Kate also join us. Next, please. We organized 5 exhibitions in 4 cities in Taiwan to honor the talent of people with dementia. People with dementia play the role of teacher or lecturer to teach other general people their expertise. We also hosted a dementia-friendly workshop. The pastor, moderator, the choir are people with dementia. People with dementia read the Bible, share his testimony, and this is a wonderful experience. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. We provide training for the masters of station of metro system. People with dementia were invited to share their experience to use the metro system. And we hope that the metro system can be more friendly for people with dementia to use by themselves. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. We developed the needs. We developed the guideline of dementia care responding to COVID-19 in Mandarin last week. And we hope that the needs of people with dementia can be covered. Next, please. We provide training for more than 300 lawyers to help them understand the special needs of people with dementia and ensure the right of people with dementia to access to justice and equal recognition before the law. Next, please. We set up a task force of financial security of people with dementia. We have completed case investigation about the dementia and poverty loss. The result will be shared in Singapore, the conference, ADI conference. We discussed the issue of financial exploitation in Taiwan Dementia Conference last year. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. Last year, there are 3 projects funded by Ministry of Labor to support people with dementia to work. And now we have a young cafe, which 9 young people with dementia working in the cafe. Next, please. We collaborate with University of Wollongong to develop dementia and driving decision aids in Mandarin to help people with dementia to have the safe driving. And we did provide 4 DDDA trainings for care managers, and the care manager can help people with dementia to use this DDDA. Next, please. There are 87 integrated dementia care centers in Taiwan to provide people with dementia a timely diagnosis, and also the care consultation service after diagnosis. And there are more than 400 support centers for people with dementia and their family to provide activities for people with dementia to maintain the maximum function, and also provide support group and care training for family carers. Next, please. Before the election of Taiwan president, we raised awareness to general public that people with dementia still have the right to vote, and also we have the support service in the election. Actually, the support service for people with disability. Next, please. Okay, this is the last slide. What is the hurdle we face? It is difficult to involve people with dementia to join a dementia advisory group. Stigma is a very important factor. So now we only have 1 dementia advisory group in Taiwan. We hope that in the future, more people with dementia can join this group, and more groups in Taiwan. And to be honest, I'm a nurse. I'm not familiar with CRPD before DAI, ADI mentioned about CRPD and the human rights. And after Kate speech, we study very hard about CRPD and try to apply it. And I think that the human rights approach actually is not the usual mindset of professional and the carers. And we need to raise awareness of human rights in the training of professionals. And we need to advocate for, and not advocate for people with dementia, but advocate with people with dementia. I would like to say thank you to ADI, DAI, and Kate. We learned a lot through this process, this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, LiYu, for giving us the wonderful example of Taiwan. Now, I just would like to make sure that we do pick up some of the questions. We have had a lot. So what I suggest is I pick a couple, and I'd like to leave 3 minutes at the end for Kate to do her remarks. So if panelists could participate quickly into responding to this question. The first one I think we need to pick up is, how can non-Alzheimer's society group get involved at international level? And connected to that is, how do I get involved in groups like the UN Open-Ended Working Group? So I would suggest that this one goes to Kate first and then to Silvia. Can you keep your answering quite short, please?
Sure, Paola. Look, I think that getting involved in the international work is probably, to start with, contact ADI and DAI because both organisations work to some extent at the international level. But I think Silvia is best to answer that more than me, actually. So I'll hand over to Silvia.
Okay, thank you, Kate, and thank you for the question. In my slide, I mean, I only have one slide with links, which actually I will update with a few more links we can share with everybody. But there is a link to the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older People, and I would really encourage to follow that link and to see how to engage. And there are useful resources for both engaging at the local level, at the national level, and as well in the open-ended working group. And if you follow the link, that is a separate link to the open-ended working group, there are a couple of pages on how NGOs can get accreditation, or if you belong to an NGO that has already ECOSOC status, how to register. There is, if you follow those links once a year, and there are often calls for inputs. The same will be following the ohchr.org. It's the link, is the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, where you have sections for the treaty bodies, where the CRPD belongs to. You have also a section to the Human Rights Council or to the Universal Periodic Review, and to all of them, there are often calls for consultations and for inputs from anybody. For example, the Special Rapporteur on violence against women makes a call for inputs about older women with disabilities, for example. So this is an opportunity for anybody to send cases from the national level. They are more appreciated than just global input, because what we need is exactly examples from your own countries. I can send more links with the slide.
Yes, Silvia, thanks. We will share the slides. Can I also remind all participants that there is a booklet on the ADI website about how to participate to some of these mechanisms, with the idea of how to advocate as well. And can I remind everybody that ADI does participate to all these groups. So if you're interested, you have to follow our activities, and then if we call for input, you can input, and we will make sure that you are represented. That's part of the issue of having this webinar, is to make you aware that we are doing this advocacy and you can participate. Now, I'd like to put one other question. This one is for Mary Beth. There is a question about how does the ODA, the Ontario Dementia Advocacy, tackle the challenges of Indigenous dementia population through supporting policy advocacy. Mary Beth, you have an insight for us? Very briefly, please, because I'd like to do closing remarks.
Yes, there is an individual who represents that particular group at the ministerial advisory level, so the federal level, and she's doing fantastic work across Canada. And in fact, the Indigenous population have a lot of supports in the area of dementia. DAC, Dementia Advocacy Canada, literally just had a meeting with her about 2 weeks ago. We're looking to join forces with her. So it's on its way. They do have some really amazing supports, and that's built in into the Federal Ministry of Health.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I'm sorry that we don't have any more space for more questions. We will try and answer to everybody online. Kate, to you now for the final remarks.
My final remarks, thank you, Paola. Thank you to all of the speakers. Special thanks to people for attending this really important webinar. I think I'd just like to say from a human point of view that people with dementia didn't choose to have dementia, but a great many of us do choose to fight for equal inclusion and full and equal access to the CRPD and universal healthcare, including rehabilitation. And so it's wonderful to have so many other people collaborating together and working together with us and with each other. So certainly part of the focus of the work of DAI and ADI has been on human rights, and to ensure that since the World Health Organization Global Action Plan on the public health response to dementia was adopted in 2017, that national, regional or local dementia plans include human rights and that people with dementia have access to the CRPD. And I know that ADI do an enormous amount of work around the world to support developing countries and countries that don't yet have national dementia strategies or plans. ADI do a lot of work to help them develop them. So really, I'd just like to thank everybody. May the work of others, past and present, continue to inspire us all to fight for tangible change.
Thank you everybody. We're finishing here this webinar. It will be available on our website if you want to listen to it again, and we will be circulating that slide deck. Thank you so much to all participants. Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.